The Jewish tradition actually doesn't tell you that everyone must do this in the world. Rather, it prescribes goodness. And that's what it is that religion is supposed to bring into the world. Now, can you point to examples of religious wickedness? Of course you can. But that's clearly what Judaism asks of people. The first obligation that you have is goodness. And that's why when you talk about religion as though it is inherently totalitarian and tells you you must act this way, it makes two mistakes. First of all, it doesn't see religion as evolving as everything else does, when in fact the Judaism of thousands of years ago ought to be, must be, should be, is expected to be different from the Judaism of today.
Still has 10 commandments.
Right.
Yes, none of which mention goodness.
Guys, you have to let me finish my statement, okay?
Please.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I feel a little bit between a sandwich here, but the second part of it is that if you say that faith does nothing for you, as Christopher repeats over and over again, it's very hard to explain why it is that millions and millions of people all over the world and throughout history have felt that faith deepens their life, gives them meaning, increases their goodness, and why it is, for example, in America, that people of faith give more to charity, vote more in elections, volunteer more, help more. Do you know what the largest aid organization is, aid and development organization in the United States? It's not CARE, it's not Save the Children. It's One World, which is a Christian organization out of Seattle, which not only gives millions and millions and millions of dollars across the world, but sends people all across the world to the most beleaguered, helpless places, and they do it because they believe they're called to do it by God. It's just not true that having faith makes no difference in this world. It makes a tremendous difference, and the vast majority of that difference, not all of it, but the vast majority of that difference is for goodness.
Let me put a question then, if you'd be so good. The rabbi feels in a sandwich, and I don't mean for you to feel in a sandwich. So
No,
let me
we
put this to you.
Oh, that's okay.
Christopher, what about the solace of faith? Some of the most religious people I know ended up there.
Oh, this is a softball. I want a hard question.
Well, no, I mean,
I know what he's going to say to this.
Well, maybe, but he's been
hard-minded, hard-hearted, non-needer of
yes,
solace.
Worse, you're a misanthrope because you're not sympathetic to people's need for religion.
I say in my book, available at fine bookstores everywhere, that as long as I don't have to hear about it, I don't mind what people believe. If they say, well, thanks to Joseph Smith and his gold plates, I have real faith now, and I've got a family, and I have friends, and I have a real system, and so on, I say, fine. Just don't come to my front door with it. Don't ask for a tax break for it. Don't ask my children to be taught it in the school.
Did you sign up tonight thinking you wouldn't hear about it?
And I asked them the question in the book. People think they have a personal relationship with the Creator, and they're the possessors of a wonderful secret. And it must feel, I've never felt it, but I presume it feels great. Why doesn't it make them happy? They're not happy. They can't be happy until everyone else believes it too. They go out and proselytize, very often, and here's, I can't let your last answer go, very often in the guise of charity. You notice how often that religion, rather than answer the questions that I've put, like how do you know there's a God, what evidence do you have for it? Which you say, well, lots of good people do good things because they're religious. Well, let's take the most recent pressing case. Richard Dawkins and I and a few others, in the response to the Haiti earthquake, set up an emergency charity for people of non-belief to give to, because so many charitable organizations are, in fact, proselytizing groups. So we raised about 2 million in a weekend. And all that money goes straight. By the way, thank you. If you go to Richard's website, you can find out more about how to donate to this, because it's permanent. It's going to stay in being. All that money went straight to Doctors Without Borders, of course, and the International Red Cross, which, though it has a cross, isn't a religious organization. Both these organizations are already in Haiti. They're proven. None of the money goes to support any missionary activity. None. And the Scientologists and all the others who turned up in Haiti, and the people who turned up in Haiti to kidnap babies to convert them to their faith, and the Catholics who turned up and said, standing in the ruins of their own cathedral, with 250,000 Haitians buried under the rubble, said, God spoke here today, and you should listen to his message. Don't tell me that's good. Don't tell me that's good. That's wicked. It's proselytizing. It's proselytizing with the helpless, using them as objects of charity and conversion. It's lying to people.
But there's also a lot
It's
of
wrong
relief
to
there.
lie. It's wrong to lie to people, and it's giving them false hopes and false explanations for their plight. Now, we're not guilty of any of that. And now I'll ask you another question. Where in the Decalogue does the word goodness appear? Where? That's a good swathe of Exodus for you. Where in Exodus does the word goodness appear? Where in this commandment-rich territory does the word goodness or the enjoinment to be good occur? This should be a softball for you.
Okay. First of all, it tells you what you ought not to do. It says, love your neighbor as yourself in the book of Leviticus. I mean, I'm allowed to move to Leviticus from Exodus.
I think that's fair.
Right.
Yes, that's fair.
Yes, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. It says you should pursue justice, justice you shall pursue. It says it over and over and over again. And also, by the way, no tradition, at least certainly not the Jewish tradition, and I'm not aware of any other tradition, is only the Bible. Judaism is a long exegetical tradition, and it says several times in the Talmud that the one purpose of the mitzvot is litzaref et habriot, which means to refine human character. It's clear that Judaism is directed around goodness. It's repeated over and over again. The whole system and framework of mitzvot are to get people to treat each other decently. And if you say, which you do, that people use authority, governmental authority, religious authority, military authority, political authority to do bad things, my answer is, of course they do. Anytime you set up a structure of authority, people will do bad things. Churches, other things. But yes, of course. So what you say is, what you heard is, when religion does good things, it doesn't count because sometimes they want people to believe what they believe. When it does bad things, it's because of religion. When you make everything good that happens that religion does invalid, and everything bad that religion does representative, that's called arguing in bad faith, which is ironic for someone who has none.
It seems a fair question.
Yes, but it's not, I mean, as I know you know, that isn't at all what I say. I don't say bad things are done in the name of religion or by authorities. I say it's religion itself that is the problem. I go out of my way to make clear that I don't take refuge in any other position. Now, in Leviticus and in Exodus, if you're a neighbor, you better not, and you're supposed to love him. This person had better not be an Amalekite, a Midianite, a Moabite. Better not be a witch,
Yep.
the destruction of whom is enjoined. Better not be a homosexual, the stoning of whom is enjoined. Better not be a slave, the terms of enslavement of which are all laid out. Now, these are primitive, tribal, agricultural. Most of the commandments, by the way, all the Decalogue, by the way, is addressed to the property-owning classes. Here's what you can't do with your servants. Here, your servants must also obey this commandment. Why are the commandments addressed only to people who have staff? Why are the women, rather a large objection, I would have thought, why are the women counted as part of the animal and chattel that's disposable by these holders of property? Couldn't it be any more obvious that this is a man-made phenomenon, and at a time when people were not at their best and were full of fear and ignorance and greed and covetousness of other people's property?
Can we be faithful and not be trapped by history? Not all of its elements are
Well, it's not only
attractive.
that, but as Christopher knows very well, I assume that the Bible was put together by human beings and that the Jewish tradition is a long evolving tradition, as are other traditions, in which the dross of history is gradually refined in the same way that you would not expect someone 3,000 years ago to be able to understand the sort of arguments that you're making tonight. People change. There's an evolutionary process also not only to biology, but to sociology, to ideology, all of those things. And that's why the question is very much, does religion make people better? And can these systems refine themselves? And can they get rid of the stuff that's bad in religion? And I think that to assume that you can cherry pick the things in the statements in religion that are negative and those things are necessarily enduring contradicts the history of every tradition I know.
Well, cherry picking is an odd word to use for something that's thrust upon you. I've got no choice but to study the Decalogue.
No, actually,
I point out it says it's addressed to property owners and enjoining them to keep women as property.
So
you're cherry picking, nitpicking.
Are you
I'm
in
not.
favor of theft,
It's a-
murder,
it's a-
and
it's a-
adultery? Do you
it's
think
a-
those are good things?
Well, there's exactly the nub of my question. If what you say is true,
Yes.
Not that, and I've never said, I couldn't be interpreted as having said no religious person can do a good thing.
No, I didn't
but if
say
what
that.
you
Right.
say is true, this should be true, and you should find it easy to point it out.
Okay.
There must be something, not that they can do or do, but that I cannot do, that's a good thing. Either a moral statement made, or a moral or ethical statement performed, the person of faith could perform that I cannot.
Now,
You must be able to identify that.
No, actually,
if your point is to have any faith
how can
at all.
how can one human being do something that another human being can't do physically? Physically, of course, you could do anything that I could do, but I can say lots of things you
No, I
don't
said a moral
do.
or
I can say
ethical.
lots of things you don't do, not that you can't do. You probably don't do, as I do, bless your child on a Friday night. You probably don't create great works of art based on religion. You probably don't go halfway across the world feeling that you're motivated and called by a God who tells you to help other human beings. I mean, all those things are things that religion motivates people to do. Not that you can't do them, but that people generally don't do them if they're not motivated
Well,
by
come on,
religion.
to get real. I mean, pronouncing an incantation
Yes.
isn't a moral action.
Of course it
or
is.
is it? No, it isn't.
It's,
Not in
only,
itself,
it's
no.
only not a moral action if you don't
It
feel
can subjectively
the
be associated.
enormous-
It's
if
not a
you-
moral
it-
action. And
it's
anyway, it
only
is
not a
something.
moral-
It is
wait,
something.
wait,
It
it's
is
not-
something I could do.
It's not, I know, of course you can, and I encourage you to do it. It's only not a moral
Maybe
action
one day.
if you don't feel
Not.
the unique expression of love when it takes place in an atmosphere of sanctity that is not the same as saying to a child, I love you. I have to tell you, I mean, some of you knew my father, who passed away in May, who was a rabbi. When I think of the most powerful and intimate moments that I had with my father, it was when he put his hands on my head and blessed me on a Friday night. Now, he would not have done that were he not religious, and it wasn't the same as when he kissed me goodnight and said, I love you. Because there is an element in which religious people dwell. It's called a world of sanctity that you can't invoke and can't dwell in if you don't believe that that realm exists.
Christopher,
So do you? Well, wait. First, I'm sorry for your loss, as the Irish say. Sorry for your trouble.
Right.
Second, but I'm still going to have to insist. I don't think anyone in the audience can consider that's an answer to my challenge.
course
Right to say there's a moral or ethical statement or action that an unbeliever could not perform.
But could not means that you're physically incapable of it. And
No.
I'm willing to concede
No, if
right
it's
here,
goodness, it would
you
be
can do
morally
everything I can do.
Well, let's
Of
not go
course
that
you
far.
can.
Let's go.
Of course you can.
All right. Well, then. Okay.
I mean, how,
all right.
you have to say wouldn't do. You
well,
can't say
I will
can't
leave, since
do.
you won't answer it, I'll just leave the question to the audience. If anyone
I
can
just
come
did
up to
it.
me and say, here's a moral thing you couldn't do, not don't do, could not do, that only a religious person do, I'd be very interested to hear of it. No one's ever come up with anything.
let me ask you a
Second,
question.
there was a brief corollary. Think of a wicked thing done, or evil thing said, that is done precisely because of faith. You've already thought of one.
But any that someone who doesn't have
And
faith
now
couldn't
you've-
do?
and now
Wait,
you've
tell
got-
me one that
No,
someone who
I
doesn't
didn't-
have
no,
faith could not do.
I didn't say that.
Okay, but that's exactly the point.
No, it's not.
A human being can do certain things, whether they're believers or not. They have the physical ability.
It still doesn't.
Believing something doesn't give you a
it's
new
to
physical
you,
ability.
It's no problem to you that the suicide murder community, the genital mutilation community, these are all faith-based communities.
Do you want
And
me to
while we're
answer
on the
that?
subject of charity, who doesn't hear Hamas saying, the reason we're loved by our people is because we provide social services. We help the needy. We're the only people who come out and do that, which is, by the way, I'm horrified to have to say is true. But do you excuse them for that because they're charitable?
Of course
No.
not.
Do you not think that they bless their children a whole lot?
Yes, and I
bet
think
you
that that's a
can-
beautiful
I've
thing
heard
that they
them
do.
it.
Right.
You try
But
being,
I
you
don't
try,
think- I
try
don't
being a
think they're-
Muslim children and the child not be blessed the entire time. That's part of the authority that they claim.
But
They claim
Christopher,
to
I
own these
want
people.
to ask,
This is all faith-based.
who steps up to, you won't like any of the language, but life has a lot of despair. People fall into despair. Who steps up to save? And I don't mean in Christian terms necessarily at all, but who steps up to reach out to those people? And for society as a whole, if you don't have the teaching of religion, what will offer a kind of moral construct? I don't see it in schools. Union halls are gone. Who's going to give people
I live in such a
structure
world.
of a
I
structure
live in
of
such a
meaning?
world. It's called Hollywood. You see
Hollywood,
what happens.
well,
yeah,
exactly. I mean,
right.
it may have blemishes, it may be deeply flawed, it may be fatally flawed, you would say, but what's the substitute, what's the structure for moral teaching to save the despairing?
I think despair is quite a good starting point myself. I mean, I think it's very good to know that we're born into a losing struggle. I think that the stoicism that comes from that and the reflection that comes from that is very useful. I'm not very impressed by people who say, well, I wish it wasn't true, so I'll try and act as if it isn't. It is true. Everything is governed by entropy and decline and annihilation and disaster. And you're born into a losing struggle, and because you're a primate mammal, you know you are, and you know you're going to die, and that there'll be a lot of struggle and pain on the way. I don't want a world without anxiety and grief and pain and struggle. I can't get it.
No one's saying you
but
can't
those who
have
offer
that.
it to me, I spurn the gift. I don't want what you want. I don't want the feeling of eternal love and peace. Love and peace, very, very overrated in my view. One of the many reasons, actually, I should despise all religions equally, but and I do in a way. But one way which I prefer Judaism to its rivals is that the emphasis is more on justice than on love.
I want to go to the rabbi. Why is that not misanthropic of you, that attitude?
Misanthropic doesn't mean I have to hate people.
Well,
It means I respect them. It means I respect them enough. It means I respect them enough not to offer them false consolation.
I do think it's important.
The realm of illusion will not help you to cure this condition.
I do think it's important to say that part of this is based in temperament, but also part of it is based in life experience. I spend a lot of my time at the bedside of people who are dying, with parents who lost children, with husbands who lost wives and wives who lost husbands. The sense of community that is created by religion, the sense that life is meaningful even if it's short, all of that, it's not trivial, it's not cheap consolation, it's not illusion. It goes to the depths of the questions that human beings ask themselves. And I know that you can make a clever remark about the cheap selling of religious consolation, but you know what? The remark gets melted by the heat of human anguish when you're standing beside the grave of a child who died and the mother is saying a prayer, and that brings her some measure of comfort because she really does believe that this world in some sense is meaningful and is not nihilistic and is not empty and is not foolish. And although I can't prove to you in an empirical sense that in fact the world is meaningful, at that moment, even as I question it, it seems to me the deepest instinct of my soul.
Well, if you'll... Gosh. Well, if you'll pardon me, I won't share any of my griefs with you. But I've never had one, or known anyone who had one, who's had the faintest consolation from religion. And indeed, being told, as the Christians tell them, that they're off to a better place and so on, I think is positively wicked thing to do. I think lying to the dying for a living, what self-respecting person can do that?
And you know it's a lie because,
once you
just
face,
tell me how you know it's a lie,
once
since you assert it again and again.
Because the person saying it cannot possibly know it to be true,
and therefore
they
it's a
don't
lie.
have access to information that's
Even if
denied
they
to me.
believe it, it's
Yes,
a lie.
Yes, it's a lie.
But how do we create, for those who aren't able or don't desire to walk around in despair or to walk around in irony, in a world that can bring plenty of despair? Try it, fine. But I think it's manifestly clear lots of people don't choose that. So what does atheism offer?
Well, it offers the chance of living without illusion, which I think it says that philosophy and literature will do a great deal more for you. There's a lot more morality in them. There's a lot more ethical discussion in Dostoevsky, say, than
It may
any
be true,
of the
but
holy
who will
books.
present them
Or
in our
George-
society, in a
or
real
George Eliot.
society? Who will
Well,
present them in a way that
for
creates
now,
structure?
For now, I'm presenting
There
them.
it is.
For now, I'm presenting. Right? I can't do...
You're going to be very busy.
I can only appear in my own person here. I can even say that to some extent it works for me. This irony, I think, is tremendously useful, as is philosophy, especially the philosophy of Spinoza, especially in times of anguish. And the realization that there's no false consolation can actually cheer you up. Once you face the fact that you're born into a losing struggle, things immediately appear a great deal more manageable in some ways. And really, of the remarks against this made, not one of these remarks couldn't have been made by a devout member of the Muslim Brotherhood. And what I want to ask him is this: if anything of what he says is true, is he really saying that he would prefer me not to be myself, not to be an unbeliever, and someone who believes in irony and of the Andalusian world, but I'd be morally better off if I was a Wahhabi Muslim, for example,
me
or a Roman
is he
Catholic.
me?
Does he?
Are you
yeah,
asking?
Yes, no, okay.
I mean, according to you,
So,
I would
well,
be a better
no,
person
don't
if I
answer
was
the
a
question.
person
You
of faith.
asked me the question.
Sorry.
You're not allowed to answer it for me.
You imply.
I implied,
I want to know
okay.
if you really mean it.
If you say to me, I'm a good person, but I don't believe, is it better that I would be a miserable person who believed? All I have to do is look at the sources and say, obviously not. Obviously, it's better for you to be who you are and to promote goodness in the world. That's exactly, L'takeno olam b'malchut Shaddai is what the Jewish tradition teaches, to make the world better under the sovereignty of God. But notice the first clause in that is to make the world better. So if you do that, that's the primary demand of any faith that I think is worth its salt.
May we turn on that point to what Barry Schreck raised as an acute concern, that is violence. And the question of whether violence is integral to religion or exceptional and an offense to religion, or both or all three, violence and religion.
Okay, so I'm going to try to abbreviate this. There are two things to remember. First of all, most religious conflicts are not about religion. What you find is religions will fight when there's land, when there's power, when there's resources, when there's water, when there's money. It's very rare for a religious group, not inconceivable, very rare for a religious group to say, hey, guess what? There's someone halfway across the world who believes differently, let's go get them. Right? It's the people who live next door to us, who are other than us, we should get them. And by the way, along the way, we're going to take their land, and we're going to take their riches, and we're going to take this. And that's because, and if you look in the Encyclopedia of War, which is probably not something that you peruse in your leisure hours, but if you do, you will see that it identified 1,763 wars since the beginning of time. 123 of them are identified as religious wars. When you take religion out of a society, you don't get a more peaceful society. We look at the 20th century, it was like a laboratory for that. Stalinism, Maoism, Nazism, Cambodia, North Korea versus South Korea, on and on and on and on. The fact is, the record of extracting religion is very poor. And the final point is this, which is, if you ask why religious people fight, the answer is clear. It's because they're people. I have a colleague, and not a rabbi, but a psychologist in Los Angeles who studies bullying. Do you know at what age bullying is most prominent? Think to yourself what age, and then I'll tell you the answer. By far, the answer is preschool. Because we're not born all sweetness and light. It's why it's so much hard work to get a kid to be good. Right? Parents don't have to say to their child, why don't you share a little bit less? You know? Because you're too selfless, you're too kind. Instead, it's very hard work to get people to do well. What religions are known for is their attempt to make something straight of the crooked nature of human beings. And they fail again and again and again, exactly as you would expect if you know human nature. But that doesn't mean that the attempt to do it makes people worse. Quite the opposite, at least according to the evidence of history.
Well, violence,
Christopher?
there's no mystery about violence. I mean, violence arises because we are primates, imperfectly evolved. Our prefrontal lobes are too small, our adrenaline glands are too big. There are various other deformities of this kind. Sexual organs designed by a committee, all the rest of it. And we're greedy, and we're greedy and fearful, and covetous of other people's and also, surprisingly, it's probably our biggest defect, given that the reason we're so successful is there's almost no genetic difference between us. If we were dogs, we'd all be the same breed, fantastically little variation. But we're incredibly prone to tribalism and ethnic and racial, what Freud calls the narcissism of small differences. So, of course, if a tribe, let's say, that's calling itself the Children of Israel, for the sake of argument, decides that it should kill all the other tribes that get in its way, take their women as slaves, butcher their men, take their land, take their cattle, and so battle in this way across to Canaan and take everyone else's land and burn down there. That's going to happen whether there's a God or not, or whether there's religion or not, but it'll happen very much more intensely if they believe they have a mandate from heaven to do so. It's a terrific force multiplier. I think there would have been a quarrel between the Hutu and the Tutsi of Rwanda, say, once Belgian colonialism had established that there were these two different character groups, types, tribes. But it's a terrific force multiplier that the Catholic Church was as strong as it was in Rwanda, the most Christian country in Africa, made it infinitely worse. What makes the Israel-Palestine two-state solution ungettable? Because there's a chunk of people on both sides who say they have God in their corner and God gave only their group the land. And they can negate the votes of everybody else, including the whole of the international community, by the way, just because of their faith. Northern Ireland is the same. There would have been a Republican nationalist dispute. It's infinitely worse because of religion. So I think the corollary I'd like to hold would be that the less religion there was, the less violence there would be. But I can't in good Darwinian conscience say that. But I think the more that people refused orders that were divine, as for example, to take the preposterous allegation that the rabbi makes that the wars of the 20th century were secular wars, the belt buckle worn by every soldier in the Nazi army that says Gott mit uns, God on our side. I don't think that was a help, do you? Things were bad enough as they were. On page 70, I think it is, of Mein Kampf, Hitler says that in taking on the filthy virus of Judaism, I know I'm doing the work of the Lord, and I'm summoned by the Lord to do this work. A book, one of the very few books the Vatican didn't ban in that period, by the way. I don't think that was a help either. So I'd say, on the whole, we'd be better off without the belief either in a supreme dictator, because that leads to violence, or the idea that God takes sides in our pathetic mammalian disputes.
I want to just, as a coda to this, when you say that we shouldn't take orders, I just want to remind you of a long history. For example, the abolition of slavery was almost entirely the work of people who believed they were taking orders from something higher than societal orders. Wilberforce in England, here, Beecher and John Brown and so on, they believed they were doing God's work by abolishing slavery. And it's interesting that the abolition of slavery was a Christian movement, but the idea is it's not an issue of who you take orders from. It's an issue of the orders you take. That's the issue. And it comes down in part to what kind of religion you practice, not whether you practice religion.
Comrades, I'm sorry.
Comrades, what kind of orders you take.
Brothers and sisters.
That's better.
Comrades, friends. I suppose it is somewhat to the credit of some Christians that in the waning decades of thousands of years of slavery that were biblically mandated, some of them belatedly joined things like the American Anti-Slavery Society, stars of which were Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, non-believers, right? Whereas to the last day of the Confederacy, the flag of the Confederacy said Deo Vindice, God on our side. And every justification for that slavery came from the Bible, where indeed it's not hard to find.
David will be Christopher Hitchens.
Thank you. Okay.